It is a challenge, but it's absolutely necessary for climate, for health, for community, for understanding the value of food to our lives. And we can't do without it. And to see how many people are hungry. How could this be in this country? How could it be? How could it be in any country? That there's something deeply wrong with the way the industrial food system has free range.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Alice Waters, a widely known chef for her farm-to-table restaurant, Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. She's written many wonderful cookbooks, including We Are What We Eat, the Slow Food Manifesto, and Coming to My Senses, The Making of a Counterculture Cook. Alice is a true champion of organic. Her public challenge to get more organic food into the mouths of school children led to the planting of an organic garden at the White House under the Obama administration. She founded the Edible Schoolyard program for elementary-age kids in 1996 and Edible Education 101 for college students and members of the public in 2011. Alice was featured in this year's annual virtual symposium, which focused on consolidation in the food system and the need to enforce antitrust laws. Tickets are still available to watch the recordings of Break 'em Up, the chickenization of organic. You can watch the preview and find out all the details by visiting the realorganicproject.org website.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today once again with Alice Waters. Alice, so nice to be here in your beautiful home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love talking with you.
So, yeah, actually, what an amazing career or life you've had, all bound up with food. And, you know, you've looked at food from so many perspectives, from deliciousness and service, serving people food, and nutrition, and public policy, and also kind of these huge social forces of industrial, corporate food and artisanal food. When you look back over this period, Chez Panisse is 53 years old now?
It's going to be 53 in August.
All right. Yes. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Amazing. Most restaurants only last a year.
Is that true?
That is true. So it's a hard business. It's a hard business to earn enough support to keep going. When you started, when did you start to be excited by food?
Well, I was very lucky, first of all, to be in Berkeley in 1964 at the University of California. And it was when there was the whole anti-war movement and civil rights, and Mario Savio was giving a big speech every day out in Sproul Plaza. And I was so naive to the politics, and I just got pulled into it completely. And Mario was somebody who felt that education should give students a taste of the world, basically, and they shouldn't be, in a major that took them through those very important 4 years or 6 years of education. He said, travel the world. So I went to France in 1965, and I had never been out of the country before. And it was at that moment when France was a slow food nation. It was only having food that was locally produced and only in season. I didn't know that, but everything I tasted was amazing. I felt like I'd never eaten before. The way that it looked, the marketplaces, the way that parents came home for lunch to have it with their children, if you can imagine. And I watched those long lines in front of the bread bakery and thought, how could anybody wait 20 minutes in line to get bread? And then I did it. And every day I did it. And I loved talking with people who were standing in line with me. And it was an awakening, a sensory awakening for me. So when I got back home, I just said, I want to live like the French. Yeah. I want to see the beauty of food and connect with nature, seasons. And I guess very naively, with a couple of friends, I said, well, maybe if we opened a French restaurant, the food would come, or something like that. I mean, I tasted food in the very fancy French restaurants in San Francisco at the time, and I didn't know that most of their food was imported from France. So they had Dover sole, and they had many of the ingredients that I longed for. But in fact, they were really coming from France.
I've eaten at Chez Panisse. It's delicious, and my whole family came. We had a meal. So 4 very different people with very different food tastes. And in fact, I said, we won't sign up for the chef's choice. We're going to order, because I knew that my kids would have very different tastes. But they all had a memorable experience of deliciousness, of very simple food. So I think that that's significant, that when we talk about French cooking, sometimes we think of very fancy, elaborate, a lot of heavy sauces. That was not what it was. It was the kind of food I would make at home, except you did it a little better.
Well, I love those little restaurants in Paris that were run by a family. And they were small. They all had a bar. Sometimes they had their kids there at dinner time. But they had a fixed price menu that cost a certain amount, and some a la carte choices, but I always wanted the fixed price because it was 3 or 4, sometimes 5 courses, but they were all chosen to be together. And I wanted that idea for Chez Panisse. When we first opened, there was no choice except for salad or cheese. And I was sure if the food was good enough that people would come back. And they have. Yeah. And yes, we have a cafe upstairs, and I feel like it's so important that we're buying a lot of food directly from the farmers. And that is something that has been key, I think, to our success. We never serve food out of season unless we pickled the beets or we canned the peaches. But always the food is only in season, that moment in time in Northern California. And, everybody ate that way, as recently as 1950. I mean, I lived in New Jersey, and it was pretty hard with a mother who didn't know how to cook, but she cared about health, but she never learned. And so, when she had a family of 6 to feed, she struggled. And, but I think back to those days, and they always had food, like squash and potatoes that was down in the basement. And we had some applesauce that my mother made and all of those things in the wintertime. But of course, when summer came, we got tomatoes and corn like I've never had in my whole life.
Yeah.
And my parents had a victory garden that they started during World War II. The president asked everybody in this country to plant gardens to feed themselves so that the other food could feed the troops in Europe. And I'm so surprised that we have not been asked to do that now, and helped by the pamphlets that we had from World War II. I planted a victory garden right out in front of my house. I don't know whether you saw it when you came in, but I was afraid I wouldn't have enough salad during the pandemic. How could I have even imagined that I couldn't go up to the farm? But I just feel like it's so empowering to grow your own food. It really is something, and we have so much land, public land. During World War II, everybody had an allotment in England, and they had a place where they could have a garden, same way in Italy. And many of those people during the pandemic used those plots of land again.
So you're talking about a couple examples of a very different kind of food system, and everybody got by. I mean, in World War II, food was less plentiful because it was being shipped over, not just to soldiers,
Yeah.
but to the citizens of England, and to feed people whose whole agriculture had been so disrupted. And it worked. And when you went to France, and you went to a place where it wasn't just rich people standing in line for bread, everybody stood in line for bread. And it was good bread.
The best.
The best.
Still warm?
Still warm. So we know it's possible. And there's a story that it isn't possible. It's being told that wouldn't work. Well, it did work, and it does work.
Well, the reason it worked for Chez Panisse, and the reason I've gotten to know so many farmers and ranchers and fishermen, is because we went directly to the farm. There was no Cisco middleman in between. So I could give Bob Kennard the real cost of the food so that he could pay his farm workers a living wage. And that is the key to it, because when word got out around California that I was buying food at the real cost, I wasn't asking anybody for a wholesale price like the distributor does. I got 80 different farms. I made a picture of where they all were around California. But I became best friends with Mas Masamoto, who had peaches. And what I learned from him, because he had all different varieties of peaches, and some came a little early, some came a little late, some were absolutely great, just to eat like that, and others wanted to be baked. And it was a whole cooking experience that was in harmony with his farm.
Yeah, what a very sweet and gentle man. So as Chez Panisse got underway and you were doing things differently, and you were reimagining what it meant to run a restaurant, really, Did it become, were you aware of the transition to that being a political movement?
Well, I knew that what I was doing was very political in that I wanted only organic food. No question about that. And not just in fruits and vegetables, in everything we bought, whether it was olive oil, vinegar, well, everything. And so I realized that we had such an incredible array of ingredients that were, made without the industrial food system interfering in any way. And I felt like we were creating a big family of friends. And we started to run the restaurant that way too, that everybody had a voice in what we were cooking. And that has been critical to the whole restaurant industry. I hate to even call it an industry because I don't think of it that way. These are people who are feeding us. And I like to think of it, particularly at Chez Panisse, as if you're inviting people into your home. You're taking care of them in that way. They're allowed to come into the kitchen. They're allowed to see what's going on. There's nothing that they can't see because it's undesirable or it's, not something you want people to see.
So certainly there is an industry that thinks of itself as an industry, the McDonald's, and that dominates that world. Have a lot of restaurants, we won't say copied you, but let's say replicated. Let's say, were many restaurants inspired to be different, also seeing the art of the possible?
Yes, they were. I mean, many because they had lived in Europe or experienced what I had experienced, and were looking for taste and the purity of the food. But I know that we had people coming in and out of the restaurant at the beginning. There were many people on the East Coast that I know that were beginning this about the same time. And it was this friendship that we all had that helped to lift up the bigger idea about how food is grown and when it needs to be eaten, to have that really delicious taste. As I said, you cannot have taste if you pick an avocado off a tree when it's not ripe, and then you ship it from halfway around the world from Mexico to Denmark. I mean, there's something that you will not taste when you eat that avocado in Denmark, that I taste when I eat it when it's just been picked ripe off a tree here. And for me, it's all about taste.
Can I ask, it's a belief of mine, you might have looked at research though, about the correlation between taste and nutrition.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yes, let's talk about that. Well, that's the miracle of it all. That food that is grown in an organic, regenerative way where you're allowing the soil to give the carrot all that it can give. The nutrition of that carrot. I mean, Bob Kennard said his carrots were 25% more nutritious than anybody else's. And I believe that because the nutrition comes from the soil. It's so rich with all of those little bugs and all of the things that that are at the same time pulling the carbon up there in the atmosphere and bringing it down in the ground where it belongs. So you have a way of growing food that is a delicious solution to climate change. It is.
Yeah.
It's the only delicious solution to it's the only really easy solution to climate. And that's why I'm so interested in using that buying power as an economic stimulus to addressing climate in the schools.
Yeah. So we have a challenge. I've talked with Dan Barber about this, and he feels very much as you do that actually deliciousness will set us free. And I go, yeah, but those scientists at General Foods are awfully good at figuring out how to hack our systems. And say what you will, people crave Doritos. And they've gotten good at creating craving.
Well, we can make those our own way. And kids love them. And I'm just writing a book about, it's going to be called The School Lunch Revolution. And we created all the dishes to fit into the USDA reimbursement for school lunch. And we know it's possible that if you're eating, when the food's plentiful, in season, organic food. And again, it's about decentralization, so that you're really connecting with the farmers in the place where you live. And you're really giving them the economic stimulus money so that they can afford to make the deliveries to you. We have to figure out a new food hub idea, but I've been working with the University of California and really thinking if we could do it with a big university, that we could understand what we needed and how it could work for feeding large numbers of people. But it doesn't all have to be uniform. That's the beauty of this idea. Every apple doesn't need to be the same size. You could have bigger ones and smaller ones. And it's something that we have been indoctrinated by the fast food industry, and that we've learned a set of values that's not true. That more isn't better, that time isn't money, and that we don't have to cook everything fast, cheap, and easy. And also that food preparation has never been fast, cheap, and easy. It's always been something that we devoted time to, that we understood the value of farmers and ranchers and fishers, that they were part of our life, a critical part of our lives. And I have to say that, again, that I've learned so much from the people who produce the food that I eat.
Yeah. You're talking about, yes.
I'm talking about a Kishu mandarin that I tasted from a little farm in Ojai, which just peels so easily. And it's a little citrus that you can only have at this time of the year. It's only available for about a month. And I offer it to you. It's without seeds. Children can eat a dozen or two of these and be incredibly happy, because they're They're so sweet.
Yeah,
They're so
delicious.
easy to peel. But it's that is so exciting about changing the food in schools. And it's so absolutely necessary to do. For health, I mean, Rachel Carson knew this almost 70 years ago. And she said these pesticides are destroying our land and our water. And she went to Congress and she talked about it.
And she faced tremendous corporate opposition.
That's right, she did.
They tried to destroy her.
That they did.
You know, I was thinking as I was driving over about Tyrone Hayes, Dr. Hayes at Berkeley, and he is a scientist who did research for Syngenta, and they didn't like the results. The results, he was testing atrazine, and he tested its impact on frogs, and it had a very scary impact on frogs, and they were shifting their gender, and it was obviously a profound impact. And they said, "Well, thank you," and he said, "Yep." They'd given him a grant, and he was going to publish it. They said, "Oh, you can't publish it." He said, "Well, of course I can. I will." And he did publish it, and they went on to try and destroy him. And they did it in a very strategic way. They were trying to attack him personally as being not a good person. They tried to attack him professionally as being not a real scientist. And amazingly, they kept detailed notes of all this. And when he sued them, they were forced to hand over the notes. So he won the large lawsuit. But it showed that this conspiracy theory wasn't a theory. It was actually a conspiracy.
It is.
And it was a reality that they didn't care. They just wanted to get the answer they wanted. They didn't care about the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happened. And because we've been so addicted to sort of those fast food values, and we think that we're getting cheaper food, and and I want what I want when I want it, and I can get what I want, and it's okay to eat in my car, and all of these ideas have really put this country against the small farmer, the organic people, the local people who care. And I just feel like if we don't go into the public schools with this idea, and we could go into the schools tomorrow. I mean, when we have a war on, we can make big unilateral decisions, and we have climate change upon us. We have a health crisis, and we could say to the USDA, let us fund the people who are taking care of the land in every state of this country, and let us buy food for schools directly from those people. And maybe there's an added financial incentive to do it. But I can't imagine that under these circumstances that we couldn't really dictate this, like the mayor of Copenhagen, for example, and the mayor in Paris decided that all the food for the Paris schools should come within 250 miles of Paris. Or is it 150? I'm not sure. And she wanted it all regenerative, organic. And it's only been a year, and they're 2/3 to doing it. Yeah. I mean, yes, France is set up in a different way. Kids eat together at school all at the same time, and their kitchens are more prepared than ours are. But I don't think just having been involved with the Edible Schoolyard project, which I started almost 30 years ago in a middle school in Berkeley. that had 1,000 kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And here we had kids who, were bringing their junk to school for breakfast. And I mean, I looked in the dumpster and I couldn't believe what I saw. Candy bar wrappers, coffee cups, all of that stuff. But we decided, because the principal said to me, Neil Smith, you can do whatever you want to do. And I said, Neil, it's all or nothing for me. I want to use my Montessori training, the idea that our senses are our pathways into our minds. That's what Montessori learned way back when, in the 1880s. She was the first woman doctor in Italy, and she wanted to know why children who lived in poverty and hunger in Naples or in India could not learn like other children. And here we live in a world where children are sensorially deprived. That's what she discovered. Our senses are our pathways into our minds. And so when you're not seeing beautiful things, when you're not out in nature, when you're not tasting, you're not smelling, you're not listening carefully, you're not touching, you're not getting the information. So I dreamed up this idea of a garden and a kitchen classroom, not to teach gardening and cooking per se, but to teach all the academic subjects. So let's say it's a geography class. Teacher comes in and you're studying the Middle East. And so you're looking at a map of the Middle East, but you're finding out what you're going to be cooking that day. You're making pita bread, and you're making hummus, and you're understanding what greens grow where in that climate and in that Middle Eastern place. And so you're experiencing the lesson in geography using all your senses. And the class, each table of 10 kids, makes a meal. And then they all sit and eat it together. So no matter what subject it is, and it could be an art class in the garden, or it could be a math class in the kitchen or the garden. But the teachers design these classes so that what they need to learn as the standards for the schools are met by the classroom experience in the kitchen or the garden.
Yeah. I know that this model has grown quite a lot. Yeah, okay.
Well, I think showing you this map is worth 1,000 words, because just in these 30 years and just having one school, I mean, we started schools around the country to have proof of concept. But this is 6,200 schools
6,200
that are part of the network. And we did start one in LA because I had a friend who ran a restaurant and she started a school there, one in New Orleans, one in North Carolina, one in the Bronx, and one way upstate New York, so that we knew that climate wasn't an issue. And every culture had a different way of running the classroom. But they all used a garden and a kitchen. And in New Orleans, after the hurricane, they decided to put kitchen and garden classrooms in every school. So it is a very, as I said, a very Montessori way of learning. But I feel that we're in such need in this country of community that it has a very important place in the public schools. We need to do this from kindergarten, and to do it in harmony with the cafeteria would be amazing. Yeah. I mean, right now here in Berkeley, California, we have not been able to buy organic food for the schools. And even though we helped build a cafeteria at King's School, we've never been able to use it in the way that it was intended. We intended every kid to be able to sit down in 2 seatings, 250 kids each time. And we knew that we could fit into the reimbursement from the USDA. But we've never been able to get around the big contracts with the industry, and we need to buy out those contracts. That's what has to happen, because some of them are almost lifetime agreements.
Yeah, yeah. So here is the place where we run up against
Money. But it's only about money.
But big money, concentrated money.
It's
not just money everywhere, it's money
yes.
concentrated in a few places.
Yes.
And it means that it's a challenge to do what we want to do, isn't it?
It is a challenge, but it's absolutely necessary for climate, for health, for community, for understanding the value of food to our lives. And we can't do without it. And to see how many people are hungry. How could this be in this country? How could it be? How could it be in any country? That there's something deeply wrong with the way the industrial food system has free range.
So there's a question that I run into a lot, where groups that I work with, some of them want to work with big industry because they feel, well, big industry controls our world. So we want a seat at the table, we want a place where our voice can be heard, and if we can make them a little better, isn't that a good thing? And well, tell me what you think about that.
Well, I think we're at a place where we have to go all the way. It's not just one thing, it's all the way. And I've operated these 2 projects that I've had for, the restaurant for 52 years and 30 years with the Edible Schoolyard. I didn't want a halfway measure. I've always wanted to prove that we could buy the food from the people who grew it organically, and that we could prepare it seasonally, and that we could be hugely successful in feeding it to people around the world that have come to the restaurant, and to very, very picky teenagers. And it's something, it's almost as if it's already embedded in our DNA, that we have this connection to nature. And when we open it up and food is at the center, you're like, it's like falling in love. you don't know why you want to go back and pick that again, but you do. And why? It's like the farmers markets have helped us across the country to understand about seasonality and ripeness and nourishment, and to have that access to the farmer and the rancher and the fisherman. It's so beautiful. And we have a huge market in San Francisco. We have one every day of the week that I could go to if I wanted to. And I know that in every big city, there are farmers markets, and people can eat at home in this way. But we really need this in the public schools. We need to begin in kindergarten and go all the way. Yeah. And we can't compromise with the ideas of we'll just do a little bit at a time. We need to have the goal of 100%.
Yeah. It's my observation that when people go in to change a huge corporation, it's the people who are going to do it who get changed, not the corporation.
Well, see, I'm not going to go into the big corporation. I hope to buy out the people whose contracts we could buy out, and then create our own, decentralize the way that we purchase food. I know we need food hubs, but I even thought just the way Chez Panisse has the people who answer the telephones shelling peas and beans. It is a way that gives people meaningful work. And I put a whole lot of beans up on the bar at the cafe, at the restaurant, and all of a sudden the customers are shelling the beans. But it's that I'm talking about. The participation of students with the preparation of the food. That I think there probably isn't a student who wouldn't like to be part of it in some way. And that is an education of its own. But we haven't really, we know that other countries around the world are doing this, first of all. I just came back from Japan, and it was revelatory to me. The care for teaching children in schools how to farm rice, because the population of rice farmers is gotten to be a very older group, and they wanted to be prepared. So in the schools, I saw these kids out in the field, and they were so excited to learn. And that's the same thing that's happening with the Edible Schoolyard. Those kids are really beginning to understand the biodiversity of this place. And just the fact that farming and food are universal. There are places, I'm sure, on this planet, and probably many, many in Japan, but they're doing this right now in the schools. Yeah. And they are in France, they are in Copenhagen, they are in Scandinavia. It's not, it's something that is second nature to us.
It is second nature, but it's also, it's an interesting thing. You know, Fred Provenza is a professor from someplace out in the Midwest. He's in Colorado now, and he wrote a beautiful book called Nourishment. Yes. You know that book? It's beautiful. And two stories, really his personal story, woven into his research. And one really interesting thing of research was that although eating well is instinctive, it's also taught. And if they took a bunch of animals from one bioregion and moved them to another, they didn't know what to eat. They had to go through that long and sometimes fatal process of discovering, no, don't eat that plant, but you can eat this one and eat a little of that if you're feeling this way. And that the babies are taught that by the mothers. They're taught how to eat.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And I have found from visiting the Asian countries, Japan, Korea, and China particularly, that the seasonal way that they have eaten in the past is so particular and refined.
Right.
And it just kind of blew my mind. I went to China with Cecilia Chang way back when, and it was the springtime, and she wanted me to eat red and green amaranth at that moment in time. And she was so determined to take me to a restaurant where I could have that and have this particular fish of that moment, that it was just such a joy to eat this food but it was way more specific than I ever imagined.
It's specific nutritionally, and it's specific horticulturally for the land.
Yes.
That the various cropping systems support each other and keep the soil fertile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really took my breath away. And I long to learn that about spices and herbs that we can, plant here in Northern California. But everybody has the potential with greenhouses to do this. And I think of Elliot Coleman up in Maine, and how he grows all winter long in the greenhouses for the schools, and then the summer he closes when the farmers markets are all there. And so we have the knowledge in this country to do this. Yes. And I'm really hoping to make a demonstration of this in the fall of this next year on the mall in DC. I would love to feed the farmers and the teachers, who are really our most valuable citizens. We always have thought that. It's only in the last 50 years that we haven't really paid attention. But if we could feed them a school lunch that's all organic and local and delicious and fits into the USDA reimbursement, I think we will have accomplished something very amazing. And we want to have at least 500,000 people
all right.
to the mall. We want to bring all the farmers from around the country, ranchers, people, teachers who have been connected to all of these ideas, and really give us hope.
We will help get the word out about that, Alice.
We're calling it Climate Food Hope.
Excellent, excellent. I'm looking at your flyer. It's beautiful. So I will make sure that we help to get the word out to our community. So let's talk about food as a system. You have said that food kind of wraps everything up. Yeah, could you talk about that? Why is food so significant? Of course it is when we stop for a moment to think about that we don't live without it.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's been ignored and maltreated, I think. And I don't just mean food, I mean the food system.
Yeah, well, we began this country with a lot of Puritans who didn't sit at the table and have a glass of wine with dinner, and who grew food for quantity rather than quality. And we got in that place of understanding that more is better. And I know that there are deep roots in the South because I have always been connected with chefs from the South, people like Edna Lewis. And I just know the biodiversity of the South. And I also know very well from growing up in New Jersey that it's possible to grow an enormous variety. I mean, I read the little pamphlet that was put out by, I guess it was the Department of Agriculture during World War II. They had pamphlets so that people could make victory gardens all around the country. And so I looked in the one for Washington, D.C. They had 23 varieties of strawberries. And I said, oh my God, I want to plant all 23. But that kind of biodiversity is what excites me. That I don't want to just eat one strawberry. I fell in love with the fraise du bois up in the woods in France. And I know that that kind of taste exists. And it just wakes you up when you pick that little wild strawberry in the garden. And I know that that biodiversity exists in every part of this country. And that the University of New Mexico is doing a whole project, like an edible education project, about what was grown indigenously there. And so this is what can really bring us back to nature, because taste is incredibly powerful.
Yes, but
how do you get that wild strawberry into everybody's mouth?
well, some people, good friends, supporters, don't like when I talk about a fight or a struggle that we're in. But undeniably, there are powerful forces that do not want us to go towards diversity. They do not want us to go towards tasting and sitting together and eating. They want us to go towards a very industrial model.
Well, that's why we have to go in the schools. That's why the University of California could be so important in making a transition, because they have that incredible powerhouse of knowledge and students that come from around the world. And we know, or I know, and people that I know around the country are very sure that we could make this happen. I went and spoke to the Georgia Organic Farming Association, and we made a school lunch there. There were 600 farmers, and I gave a talk about school-supported agriculture. And I cannot tell you what a reception we had. And to think that there are those people that are ready to do it tomorrow is very reassuring. And I know that once you begin, it's like the Edible Schoolyard project. People hear about it, see how it's being done, come and visit. It begins to happen. I think that I was very lucky to be in France at the time that I went. And I know that things have changed around the world, but just knowing that there are cultures that value food and education more than anything else, like Japan, and beauty too, that we can do this. We can do this. But we need to stop buying from the industrial system. And I just don't ever go into a store that I don't know where the food comes from.
Let me suggest. Have you seen the book "Break 'Em Up" by Zephyr Teachout?
No.
Oh, it's excellent. She came and she was one of our lead speakers at our conference at Churchtown Dairy, Abby's farm in Hudson, New York. And Zephyr is she grew up 5 miles from me, and we worked on the same farm, but not at the same time. And she's now a law professor at Fordham. And she wrote a book called Break 'Em Up, and it's really looking at a lot at the food system and also tech, and seeing the impact of the consolidation of power on our lives.
Yep.
Right? And her punchline is her title, which is that it is possible with antitrust law, most of which we have the laws, we just don't enforce them.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, I have a very good friend who has educated me all about that. And I think that is the way that we can really make a big change.
Yeah. Michael Pollan is very interesting about this, talking about cheap food as being essentially a strategy to distract people from low wages.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. What a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, Michael Pollan wrote probably the most beautiful essay about Chez Panisse in the 40th birthday book, which I'll give you. And he said, ripeness is all. And he talks about taste in the most beautiful way and full of wisdom about it. And I want to publish that and get that out in the world, because it is what happened to me, is that I fell in love with food and with nature. Yeah. And that changed my life.
You were somewhat of the muse, instrumental in the creation of the Edible Education Project at Berkeley.
Yes.
With Michael, you approached Michael. Tell me about that. How did that happen?
The Edible Schoolyard Project?
Well, when it flowered into secondary education, when it went to the college campus.
Well, it's not in the college campus in all of its glory at Berkeley.
Yeah.
But there are other campuses around the country where it's alive and well. And Arizona State is one of those places, and they have a whole course in food, and I went and spoke there. But Kathleen Merrigan was teaching, and she's somebody who's in politics, and it's so important to read her work. But we just have to believe in this because of the climate crisis. I mean, how could we not want to do everything we could do to prevent further destruction of the atmosphere?
Yeah, our biosphere.
I mean, how could we not? We're told by the United Nations that 2030, we're not going to be able to make change after that. And so I know the University of California has a climate initiative for 2025. but it doesn't include food. But I hope it could. And that's what we need to do right away across the whole system. And we have the power in the K through 12. We could do it. And it would also give meaningful work. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in this country, that most people are doing meaningless work. They're working in factories, they're making something that is unimportant, that's made from, things that are not good for us, and they drive 2 hours to the factory, work all day, drive 2 hours home. I mean, it's not a life in my mind. How could you have any time? I've always believed in doing what I had a passion for and figuring out who's doing that and who can I do it with. But food is that, to grow a garden and feed people, and especially children in schools. I would think that everyone would want to go into farming, but we have to think of farming differently. It's not an industrial proposition. It is where we all get together. Maybe we all have different plots in a huge old patchwork of a farm, where we are all growing the same things, but we have a pride in what we're doing. Or that we, harvest and we see the people that are eating it. There's so many beautiful films that have come out that are about the new way of working on a farm, where everybody's important and every animal is important. And that we're thinking holistically. And I know it sounds Berkeley in the 60s, but it's about our democracy. Really, the values of our democracy. And I wrote on that, you can read that statement of a past president.
Yeah. In the long view, no nation is healthier than its children or more prosperous than its farmers. Harry Truman.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
And I know that we need to be teaching these values in school. And of course, tasting them is the most persuasive way to be able to experience the garden, the soil. It's like Rachel Carson. She was so in love with the land and the sea, and she saw the beauty of all the worms and all the bugs, and it became, like a whole exploration into another world. And she saw how it was being destroyed. And so it was like George Washington Carver. He was somebody back in 1905 who was creating, regenerative agriculture. All these plants and he would take his classes out into the fields, and they'd sit and they'd learn about the grain. And he grew all those peanuts. And he was an environmentalist in the first circle. And he understood that the students needed that education, needed to be outside. Everybody's on a computer. I never went inside until dinner time. After school, we were outside the whole time of my grade school, climbing trees, running in the woods, riding our bikes, whatever it was. And I've watched this soul change. in my lifetime, in this very, in the last 50 years. I'm a little older than that.
No, it's these are recent changes.
Recent. That's why I'm so hopeful that we can remember how important it was. And climate is telling us, can't do this. Well, as I call it, it's a delicious revolution. Because we do, because it is. And I know that it's just a question of will, of getting it started, and hearing about people that are doing it.
Yeah, I agree. Alice, we've had an hour, so I'm going to thank you. You want to show us something?
I just want to show you these placemats that I did, because I thought school lunch could be an academic subject so that you wouldn't lose any teaching time by sitting down at a table at the cafeteria. So I thought we could make placemats. And this is about the civilizations of the Americas. And we're probably for lunch eating the corn and the beans. And probably the squash as well. And on the back, it tells you all about this. And on the front, you have a picture. So, you could have a meal from the Silk Road in India. And there you are. You're actually having a teacher at the head of the dining room. And she could be pointing this out on your placemat. I remember when we used to have tablecloths in restaurants, in cafes across the country, where it showed all of the states, and you would see the president of the state, or maybe the bird of the state, or the flower. And this is what we're doing. And I believe that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a meal that we did for Al Gore's Climate Underground. And we just, again, found all the plants that were available at that time of the year in the spring. And we cooked them, and we all ate around the table. But this is a way to make this idea irresistible. It becomes something else, particularly when you're next to other people at the table. It's very different when you're grabbing things on a line of buffet and you go to a table and half the kids are already done and leave their places. But, when my daughter went to Yale, I went after her and I said, "Tell me, how's the food?" She said, "Mom, you have to go and talk to the president." I can't eat. And I did go talk to the president. I think he thought I was going to come cook for him. But I said, couldn't we do an experiment here? Make a garden and do something in a dining hall. And he said, well, if there is a dining hall that wants to do this, I will allow him or the dining hall to buy the food the way they want to it from the local organic farmers. So it happened not to be my daughter's dining hall, but it happened to be Berkeley College. And that experiment was so successful. The kids wanted to falsify IDs so that they could go and have dinner. But we didn't plant the idea deeply enough. So when there was a change in the procurement, the way the procurement was done, when the guy who was the head of it left, all of the ideas were lost, except for the garden. And we planted a garden off campus in an area easily walkable. And there are 13 different departments at Yale that use that garden to teach. And my favorite one is the Hindu language department, because they wanted to teach them, the names of all the fruits and vegetables and herbs. So I just know that curiosity will be really immediately understood by college students. Immediately. Yeah. Because there's a longing, particularly right now, for something hopeful. And I believe that to bring students together around the table, to engage them in the preparation of their own food, will feed them. And I did a class with Michael Pollan at UC Berkeley called Edible Education 101. And all of these classes have been videoed. He did them for many years, and now, believe it or not, they're in the business department. And Will Rosenzweig every year does this semester with all kinds of people who are speaking to the whole food system. And it's so great to have it in the business school. But people like Marion Nessel have come to speak, and Jose Andres has come, there are chefs, and everything's been recorded so it could be used at other universities to engage students in a bigger picture of what this is all about.
Yeah, I just interviewed Will yesterday. I was so impressed by it.
He's amazing.
Yeah, but the whole thing.
Yes.
And it's really.
Nobody, what he's doing. I don't know whether he talked about it, but he's humanizing business. He's talking about how to run an organization where you solicit opinions from everybody. How that idea of the king at the top and all of the workers at the bottom is not the way he sees a business running successfully. So he talks a lot about that. And I just feel like he's training the next generation of business entrepreneurs in humanistic ways. And I love that. I'm sure that every one of those people will have a place to eat that's civilized for everyone.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Oh, Will is.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. No, I was really touched by him.
And Michael usually gives a first talk. I give one. And last year, I just was feeling very provocative, the usual, which I say about school-supported agriculture. But then at the end, I said, I wonder why we couldn't plant a garden at the front of Berkeley. There's a crescent there, and it's just grass. And one of the students said, and I'm looking for a chemical-free campus, and we could do something there. And I said, well, what if the chancellor doesn't allow us to do it? I said, would you come in the middle of the night with your shovels? And I said, how many of you would come? And really, 2/3 of the whole class had to come. I thought, now that's great. We could dig that up. And that's something I want to do on the mall if we can, is have a tribute to Habitat for Humanity and Jimmy Carter. We could, with that massive number of people, we could all build something in his honor, whether it's a group of trees that we plant or a monument to him. But that's the energy that we can make happen with this food system. We can, as I said, get students to go out to a farm and everybody picks together. We all bring our olives back and we crush them. And it's like an empowering kind of work. And I did a whole school, painted it inside and out with Habitat for Humanity. And we planted a garden. And every time I go by the school, I say, I did that. And it's so important. It's like barn raising in this country was very important. And I think of that, it's just so thick, but I think of that beautiful film that was made by King Vidor, Our Daily Bread. And it was during the Dust Bowl. And everybody was leaving the Midwest and going to California and abandoning their farms because they couldn't make it work. And then a whole group of farmers in one little space said, let's make a farm together. And they had to make a line to the river that was like 5 miles long. And they all went down, got buckets from the water, and they just passed the buckets all up the line. They watered the plot. They managed to get through the winter. And it was a beautiful story. And we need to know that we can do this. It's too hard. No, you can't. And yes, we can. We can. We just take our money and we spend it in a different way. Yeah. And as Ron Finley says, planting your own garden is like printing your own money.
I hadn't heard that yet.
That's the great thing, but it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Just put those little seeds.
All right. Last words? Are you good? Are we good?
Well, I was just thinking of titles of books like Grow Your Own. And I just think that really they're planting something, even in a flower pot, and watching it grow. It wakes you up in a way that you feel empowered. I just put that little seed in there and look what happened. Yeah. It could be just the littlest plot of land or, flower pot. But it's that. It feels like magic.
Okay. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.